In today's video, I'm going to discuss what it was like when I had my heart attack. Hey, what's shaking, bacon? I hope you're doing well. And this is a bit of a cautionary story for you because I want you to pay attention, because if you have a loved one who's in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, they are at high risk of heart attack if they have a history of metabolic syndrome, high insulin, diabetes, if they've had other health problems, or just a family history of something like heart disease. This is something that applies to them, and I want you to pay close attention to this story. This is how I dealt with my heart attack. It's a little bit of a weird, funny story, but it's something that you should pay attention to because the signs aren't always obvious. It's not like in the movies when someone stops and goes, grabs their chest and falls. That's not it at all. Not often. I've known people who have died from a heart attack before they hit the floor, and they know that because they still had food in their hand, and that's how they were found. I've seen people like my father who had a heart attack, and he drove himself to the hospital with the doctor's permission. We're talking back in the 80s. Things were a little different back in the 80s. So I'm going to talk about my situation though, so pay close attention to how these symptoms came on. It might be different for you or a loved one, but I want you to pay attention that men have heart attack symptoms different from what women have. So if you're in your 40s or 50s, I've known 2 women so far, old friends of mine, actually my friends' wives, who have had heart attacks. That's just mind-boggling to me. There are healthy women in their 40s. One was extremely healthy, actually. So one night I bought a fireplace and I rushed it over to my office. I was really excited because I'm a registered massage therapist. It was this 5-foot-long fireplace, so it worked perfectly in my office. I had a really nice setup, lots of natural light, curtains, all you name it. It was a great setup for a massage therapist. So I got my brother, we moved it into my office. Now we had to park out front of the building, go up a flight of stairs, and then we had to walk all the way to the back of the office where my treatment room was. Now, we didn't stop. Normally, after you do something heavy like that and you're carrying a big piece of furniture, you kind of get to the top of the steps and you stop and catch your breath and then go a little further. You rearrange your grip, you do what you need to. But in my situation, we just went straight. So after my brother left, I just plugged the fireplace right in, set it up. It looked great. 5 minutes later, my client showed up. I started giving this massage, and partway through the massage, probably about 20 minutes into the massage, all of a sudden I started getting really nauseous. And I thought, oh man, is it food poisoning? Like, I never get nauseous. I haven't had the flu since I was 10 years old. I've had a few colds, but that's it. So I was doing this back massage and all of a sudden I was just feeling really weak. And I thought, oh boy. Now I had just had an ice cap from Tim Hortons as well as a chicken wrap. So I thought, is there something funky in that chicken wrap? Because I do not feel good. So I was keeping it to myself and I'm massaging this guy and we were talking back and forth, but all of a sudden I started getting kind of quiet. And for about 10 minutes, that was the only symptom I had. And then after about 10 minutes, because I was thinking, okay, soon I'm going to be sitting down because eventually partway through my massages, after I finished working on the back, I would work on the neck and shoulders. And that's a sit down part of the job. So I was like, okay, hopefully I'm going to be sitting down really soon. And then I'll just be able to take some of the pressure off my feet and I'll hopefully relax a little bit. But after about 10 minutes, I started feeling an ache right here on my left side. And I thought, unilateral pressure, that's not a good sign. And then I noticed after a couple more minutes, it spread to my jaw. And then after a couple more minutes, it spread out to my shoulder. And it didn't go anywhere past that. And I thought, that's symptoms of a heart attack. Huh. And I'm a pretty rational guy under stress because I used to be a bouncer for a lot of years. So I was always in high pressure situations. So I got very calm. And that's one of the most important things to walk away from in this story. If somebody's having a heart attack, they need to calm down. They can't get worked up. You can't get worked up if they're dealing with a heart attack, because if you get worked up, you can work them up. And they need to keep their heart rate low. They need to stay relaxed. Whether you like it or not, you have to cool down. And that's exactly what I did. It's just my nature. So I was feeling nauseous and I felt that pressure. And then all of a sudden I felt cold, clammy hands. And I thought, okay, that's weird. And then I noticed I felt a burning in my sternum right here, right behind my sternum. But it wasn't like a heartburn. It felt like somebody took chili paste with their finger and made a line on the inside of my sternum underneath my skin and breastbone. I felt this defined line of heat and I was like, oh, that's not good. So I thought, okay, I've seen at least a dozen people through the years who thought they were having a heart attack. It turned out to be a panic attack. Well, I was under quite a bit of stress at the time, and I had already gone zero carb on and off for quite a while, and I had put lots of that weight back on. I think I was up to probably about almost 400 pounds by this point. I believe I had just had my 42nd birthday like a week before. So this was actually on my brother's birthday, this happened. And he's never let me live it down since. So I thought, okay, maybe this is a panic attack. I don't know. I've never had either a panic attack or a heart attack, but I know way more people where it turned out to be a panic attack before it was a heart attack. So it was at the point of the massage where I was able to sit down and just relax. And I thought, maybe if I just relax a little bit, we'll see how this goes. So keep in mind, from beginning to end by this point, it'd only been about 15 minutes. Ballpark 15 minutes. The first 10 minutes of that was just straight nausea. So I was just like, okay, let's see how this goes. Let's see what this is. When I sat down, I didn't really feel any better. And I was doing acupuncture at the time. And my client asked if I could give him acupuncture. And I thought, perfect. I'll put some needles in the guy and I'll go out and Google my symptoms to make sure I'm not overreacting, because I'm pretty sure this is a heart attack. Because here's the reason why I wasn't sure it was a heart attack. I didn't feel any tightness in my chest. I wasn't short of breath. And I thought I was breathing just fine. So I thought maybe this isn't a heart attack, because those are two of the most common likely symptoms when you're having a heart attack. Well, not in my case. So I put the needles in the guy, went out into the next room where my desk was, and I sat down and I Googled my symptoms. Sure enough, I had all the symptoms except for those two. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely having a heart attack. So I have to figure out how I'm going to handle this. First thing to do when you're having a heart attack, you got to get aspirin in you. And ideally, if you have access to it, some nitro. And I thought, okay, I'm 2 blocks away from a pharmacy. I can't walk there, can't drive there. My client was a young enough guy. He wouldn't have been any help because he would have panicked. I just knew this guy. He's a good kid, but he would have panicked. And I thought, no, he's not going to be a help at all. I thought, okay, I got to get that right away. I have to call my wife at the time. I have to call 911, and I have to lock up the building, shut everything off. I sat there, just assessed my situation. And I thought, okay, I was just calm. I was good. I was like, okay, so this is what I have to do. And then I went in, took the needles out of the guy, said, look, you're going to have to pay me later. Something's come up, a bit of an emergency. So don't worry about paying me. Pay me next time. I'll talk with you later. I was just trying to get rid of this guy at this point. So I already had 911 dialed on my cell phone. All I had to do was hit send. So as soon as this guy's foot went around the corner after he left my office, I hit send, called 911, told them what was happening. They said, okay, we'll send an ambulance right away. So I called my wife and I said, okay, is the food still in the oven? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, do me a favor, take it out. And she took it out. She was like, okay, what's going on? And I said, don't panic. I'm just playing it safe. I'm showing symptoms of having a heart attack. And she went, oh dear. And I said, I said, play it safe. You know me, I'm always not overreacting to things, but I take things seriously because there's certain conditions you can't fool around with depending on what they could be. Heart attack and stroke, seconds count. A gout attack, I can let that go for a few hours before I try and figure out if it's a gout attack or just something else that's happening in my foot or toe. So she panicked a little bit and I was like, don't panic. We're just playing it safe. I'm taking an ambulance to the hospital. You can meet me there. So I locked up the building, walked around nice and calm, turned everything off, walked up to the front, probably about 60 or 70 feet to the front door, went down the steps, waited for the ambulance to show up. And sure enough, the ambulance showed up, seen me standing outside, nice and calm. And the ambulance driver rolled down the window and said, hey, did you call for an ambulance? And I said, yeah, I'm having a heart attack. And he looked to me and he said, okay, buddy, why don't you tell me why you think you're having a heart attack? And I told him all my symptoms and medical terminology. And he went, okay, hop in. So I went to the back of the ambulance. He couldn't find my pulse. He checked 3 times. And each time he looked more discouraged every time he tried to find my pulse. And then he said, okay, we're going to hook you up to the machine. So they hooked me up to, I think it's the ECG. And they noticed right away, the guy went, yeah, you're having a heart attack. So they took me to the local hospital, which was literally 2 blocks away from where my office was. So when we pulled up, they wheeled me into the hospital. Now this hospital, because we don't have a cardiologist in our city, they had to send me to the next city, which was a bigger city, which has a cardiologist. So they were prepared for me by the time I got there, but it was a 25-minute drive. So when I was lying there and they're all rushing around doing their things, the doctors, the nurses, and I felt fine. My worst symptom, keep this in mind, my worst symptom was a 4, maybe a 5 out of 10. 10 being the worst. I would say it was a 4, and that was just the nauseous feeling I had. Once they put the aspirin and the nitro into me, that went down to about a 2. So I was lying there, I was perfectly calm. I let them do their thing. Eventually, they said, okay, Bruno, this is what's happening to you. Or do you understand what's happening? And I was like, yes, I do, fully. They said, okay, what do you need? Is there anything you need? And I said, well, my wife's probably out in the ER. So I said to the nurse, my wife's probably waiting out in the emergency. Can you bring her back in here? So she was like, yeah, of course. It's pretty funny because my ex-wife was a real hottie, right? So I'm a big guy and she went out and my ex-wife was standing right outside of the double doors. The nurse looked at her, looked around and said, is there a Mrs. Panucci here? And she was like, I'm Mrs. Panucci. So they brought my wife at the time back in the emergency with me, and we talked for a little bit, and I was getting wheeled away, and I was eventually getting wheeled away, and I saw that she was looking really upset, and she's watching me getting wheeled away into the ambulance. So she was really stressed and she was upset. And obviously it's a stressful situation, but stressing out and getting upset in the situation in that moment doesn't help the situation at all. So when I was getting wheeled away, I saw her and she was crying, and I was like, hey, wait a minute. And I asked the ambulance attendants to stop for a second so I could talk to my wife, and I called her over and I made a little joke to her, and she started smiling, and I was like, don't be so upset. I said, now think about this. I am in the safest position possible. We're not out in a nature walk in the middle of some provincial park an hour in where I'd have to get airlifted out by a helicopter. We're not out in some remote area. I'm surrounded by medical professionals. I'm surrounded by medical equipment. I'm getting taken to a hospital that's known for handling cardiac patients. This is the best case scenario in a really crappy situation. This is something to be happy about. They eventually knocked me out when I got to the hospital because I was asking all these questions while I had all these monitors around me. They had put a wire up my wrist, not my thigh, to go up my arteries into my heart where they were going to get rid of the blockages. Turned out afterwards, I found out I had 100% blockage in my right coronary artery. So this is important to understand how heart attacks work. You have, well, imagine a ball, right? A strawberry, a big strawberry. And there's two arteries that go down either side of this strawberry, and the arteries supply that strawberry nutrients. Now those arteries are like branches on a tree or roots on a tree. There's one big branch on each side, and it divides into smaller and smaller branches. The more severe the heart attack, the closer it is to the trunk. The more minor the heart attack, the closer it is to the periphery roots, or arteries in this case. That means if there's a heart attack and it's a minor heart attack, it happened towards one of the end roots. And if it's a major heart attack, it happened closer to the roots. Mine was right at the roots. So 50% of my heart was getting no blood at all. I couldn't believe afterwards that I had been walking around and I felt fine. This is one of the key pieces of information you have to remember. When somebody is diabetic or pre-diabetic, their symptoms of a heart attack can be buffered. Now, nowadays, the doctor said, nowadays we see people in their 40s all the time having heart attacks. When I started my practice, he said it was only people in their 50s and 60s. And back then, people didn't live through them. So I had a major heart attack. It couldn't have been much worse. The only way it could have been worse, I think, is if it happened on the other side of my heart, because on the other side of my heart is where everything got pumped out. My heart attack happened to happen on the side where all the blood was falling into the heart. So if it stops pumping out, that's where you can just die like that. So the important thing to walk away from with this information is this is happening to men at younger and younger ages, probably because the obesity epidemic that's happening where more people are putting on weight at younger ages and more people are bigger now than they used to be 40 years ago. Now, on top of that weight, there's metabolic syndrome, there's diabetes, there's all this insulin resistance, undiagnosed diabetes. And with those problems, it complicates situations. And also keep in mind when women have heart attacks, they're different symptoms. And I want to make sure you're aware when something like this could be happening to you. Your symptoms might come on in a different order or level of intensity, but keep in mind, the first sign of someone having a heart attack when you're looking at them isn't someone who's holding their wrist, grasping at their chest, thinking, oh, this isn't right. Sometimes it's something as simple as not feeling well for a couple days. And they don't think about it, and then they think, oh, maybe I'll go see the doctor in a day or two. If you're concerned you're having any symptoms of a heart attack, you need to deal with that. So anyway, thanks a lot for listening to the story. I hope it helps someone someday. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. In another video, I'll go into how I handled my heart attack afterwards when I was recovering. Anyway, take care.